Greetings and good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me for this important virtual town hall on the bipartisan infrastructure framework and what it means for our district. I'm Congresswoman Yvette D. Clarke, and I proudly represent you in New York's 9th Congressional District, Central and South Brooklyn. America is on a better and brighter path thanks to the historic passage of the Bipartisan Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. These are the provisions Brooklyn can expect from the work we did in Congress to get this important legislation passed. First of all, broadband. When I introduced the Anti Digital Redlining Act, I called for the FCC to adopt rules to address digital discrimination and develop policy models for states and localities to prevent it. The Bipartisan Infrastructure Act takes important steps to do just that through establishing broadband equity, access, and development of BEAD grant funds for these grants are re- from these grants are required to be first spent on underserved and unserved areas lacking in quality broadband access. A stable internet connection has been a critical lifeline in connecting Americans to educational, career, housing opportunities, healthcare opportunities, and the BIF, also known as the Bipartisan Infrastructure Bill, takes important steps to ensure all New Yorkers have access. Cyber attacks. The Bipartisan Infrastructure Act secured $47.2 billion in cybersecurity funding across a range of sectors and agencies. This includes $1 billion in grants for state and local governments to strengthen their cybersecurity infrastructure and prevent ransomware attacks targeting governmental entities when state and local governments are attacked in cyberspace. We all pay the price for the disruptions of these attacks cause. And as chairwoman of the subcommittee on cybersecurity, infrastructure protection, and innovation on the Homeland Security Committee, this is a game changer for our communities. Next, transportation infrastructure. Roads and bridges, $13.5 billion for public transportation, our subway systems, $9.8 billion. For airports, there's nearly $1 billion, and for freight rail, $58 billion. We're going to be spending 98.3% of New Yorkers will pay the same or less for this generational progress. In the area of education, all New York students would gain access to community college. That's a total of $5,600 average annual savings per student. All 3 and 4-year-olds in New York would gain access to high quality pre K, building on the pre K established by Mayor Bill de Blasio. This bill will help repair and rebuild our roads and bridges with a focus on climate change mitigation, resilience, equity, and safety for all users, including cyclists and pedestrians. We know that climate change is here. We know that we in Brooklyn, New York, have suffered from Superstorm Sandy, the remnants of Hurricane Ida. And this investment will help us as climate change becomes a yearly occurrence. Improve healthy, sustainable transportation. Options of millions of Americans. Prepare more of our infrastructure for the impact of climate change, cyber attacks, and extreme weather events. We'll be delivering clean drinking water to up to 10 million American families and more than 400,000 schools and childcare facilities that currently don't have access to it. We're going to connect every American to reliable, high-speed internet and upgrade our power infrastructure to meet the demands for renewable energy. This $1.2 trillion bipartisan infrastructure framework is a critical step in implementing President Joe Biden's Build Back Better vision. But our work is far from over. We'll reach our destination when the United States Senate follows suit and passes the Build Back Better Act, which the House of Representatives passed about a week ago. I'm thankful that our progressive vision took root and we delivered the votes needed to get the Bipartisan Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act across the finish line and onto the desk of our president for his signature, and it's now law. This is a meaningful opportunity to secure generational progress for millions of Americans and make good on our commitments to our constituents. And none of this would have been possible without the support from the Biden-Harris administration. This legislation is what this moment calls for. The Bipartisan Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act does not leave behind women and families who need support with childcare, healthcare, good paying jobs in our economy. And the investments in climate change action, housing, and transportation infrastructure is paramount to building Brooklyn and America back better. And we will not leave behind our immigrant communities who have shown such strength and resilience as we work to improve our immigration policies. The pandemic certainly didn't make life easier for folks in our district, and we're still trying to recover from the onslaught of COVID-19. The Build Back Better agenda in its entirety is what we promised voters when Democrats won the House, the Senate, and the White House. Now, we need the Build Back Better Act to fully deliver on this promise to the American people and to you, my constituents. And I'm hopeful that we will get it done because it's so necessary. Thank you all for submitting your questions and joining me this evening for the breakdown of what the bipartisan infrastructure framework will mean for Brooklyn. I will now attempt to answer some of your submitted questions. I was sent a question by one of our constituents, and the question reads, how will this piece of legislation benefit your average person and family in Brooklyn? Well, let me start by saying that infrastructure is our nation's backbone. All of our systems, all of our services, they all rely on our infrastructure to function effectively and efficiently. So when we're talking about infrastructure in Brooklyn, we're talking about things like our subway system, our MTA bus system. We're talking about our roads and our highways. We're talking about high-speed internet and our sewage system. These are the things that we as Brooklynites rely on each and every day. And we know all too well that our infrastructure is outdated, decrepit, and often inequitable in terms of who gets the benefit the most. The Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act is going to change all of that. We're talking about the single largest and most comprehensive investment in our nation's infrastructure to date, period, full stop. These investments will allow us to modernize our subway system, fix our roads and bridges, expand our bus routes, bring high-speed broadband into neighborhoods that are broadband deserts, and do so much more. And at the same time, these investments are going to create high-wage jobs and entrepreneurial opportunities in our communities that put people to work building and maintaining these new systems and services. Our next question, how will these investments be rolled out, and how can businesses and startups in Brooklyn compete for contracts? Well, funding will start to be made available by this bill starting the beginning of next year, and it will make its way to our district through a variety of different pathways. Some funding for projects will come directly from the federal government, while other funding will be dispersed through New York State and New York City. So expect to see RFPs put out starting next year by federal agencies as well as state and local agencies. Many projects that we will will see initial funding are likely to be projects that are already in the planning stages. And don't forget, we're talking about a total of $1.2 trillion in investment over the course of the next decade. So not all of these projects will happen at once. As different projects continue to come online, and as a result of this funding, my team will work to ensure proper notice is put out to folks in our communities so that you will have an inside opportunity to access the information and to use it to your benefit. Next question. How does this bill help minority and historically underserved communities? Well, it's no secret that the decades of divestment in our nation's infrastructure have fallen most heavily on communities of color. We see this with the drinking water crisis in Flint, Michigan, and we see it with a host of other improprieties within our communities. We see it when we talk about the way in which certain communities have access to broadband and others simply do not, or have very low speed internet. We see it when there are issues with respect to flooding in certain communities and a lack of the ability to mitigate the damages caused by that flooding. Many projects that will see initial funding are likely to be projects that are already in planning stages. And our communities will immediately be in line to access information. We see in Brooklyn where communities suffer from some of the highest rates of asthma due to highly pollutive transportation system that inequitably burdens our communities. Let me just say that this is only the first step towards advancing equity and racial justice through our economy. In addition to these massive investments in our physical infrastructure, I know that we also need to invest heavily in our community's healthcare, our housing, and our education. And that's why I fought so hard in the House to pass the strongest possible Build Back Better Act, which will provide critical support to families, the elderly, and our children to ensure that our economy works for everyone and help give our communities right here in the 9th Congressional District the ability to thrive. Next question. What jobs can we expect to come to our district as a result of the BIF? And how will the bill benefit our local, small, and disadvantaged businesses? The most direct form of jobs to come from these investments will be in occupations like construction, building management, and the building trades. These are very often high-paying union jobs. This will be for everything from modernizing the subway system and installing new broadband equipment to major roadway repairs and upgrades, as well as the laying of fiber optics for broadband in our broadband deserts and the maintenance of all of the infrastructure. And these investments will also lead to a lot of indirect jobs that are created as a result. More bus routes and newer, cleaner buses will mean a greater need for MTA bus operators and folks to perform service and maintenance. And greater broadband access and more customers will mean a greater need for broadband technicians to install and service Wi-Fi equipment. So a lot of jobs will be created upgrading and modernizing our infrastructure. There'll be a need for small businesses, entrepreneurs to be contractors to maintain and continually upgrade our infrastructure. My goal and my focus is on making sure that as we make these investments, we're making smart investments and building out a smart grid so that we're able to maximize on renewable energies, that we're able to mitigate the damages of traffic and build out EV electric vehicle charging stations within our communities as we fight the climate change crisis that is upon us. But then a lot of new jobs will also be created in operating and servicing the infrastructure and the new services that are needed to address the ongoing services that will arise from this major investment. In addition to new jobs, it is also incredibly important to me that our small businesses and entrepreneurs right in Brooklyn are able to participate in these projects. President Biden recently announced a whole of government effort to increase the share of federal contracts going to small disadvantaged businesses by 50% over the next 5 years. When we think about this in terms of the investments made through the infrastructure bill, it will be a game changer. But we must also stay vigilant and ensure that our federal, state, and local agencies are doing all that they can do to provide our small and minority owned businesses with an opportunity to compete for and win these contracts. This is a critical role that my office will continue to play going forward. Next question. Will any of the money go towards creating a better environment and protecting our communities from the impacts of climate change? Well, I've said that over and over again because climate change is a crisis that is upon us and one that I've been extremely focused on as a member of the Energy and Commerce Committee. A lot of the transformation policies that we so desperately need to tackle climate change are in the Build Back Better Act that we recently passed in the House, which includes over $500 million to decrease our planet warming greenhouse gas emissions over the next decade and set us on a path towards net zero emissions. These are provisions that I've worked tirelessly on for years through our Energy and Commerce Committee, where I am a senior member. But even still, many of the investments from this infrastructure bill will also be crucial in helping us to tackle climate change and keep our communities safe from extreme weather and rising sea levels. The infrastructure bill includes unprecedented investments to eliminate lead in drinking water pipes and ensure every household has access to safe drinking water. It also includes funding to update our sewage systems so that they can handle more intense periods of rain, which we so desperately needed during Hurricane Ida. The bill also provides billions of dollars for electric school buses and public transit buses, which will not only help tackle climate change, but also make our air cleaner to breathe and lower asthma rates, especially in children. $1 billion is also provided through FEMA to help provide resilient infrastructure so that our communities can be better prepared if and when the next Superstorm Sandy strikes. And so many other investments that will happen as a result of this bill, from modernizing our subway to upgrading our roads, will better safeguard our infrastructure and our community from the impacts of climate change. How does this bill help people in public housing? This bill calls for updates to existing public housing stock. Specifically, more than 500,000 homes will be built and renovated in low income areas. It also calls for more than 2 million affordable homes and commercial buildings to be built and renovated over the next decade. Further, the BIF establishes two grant programs aimed at bringing high speed, affordable broadband to those living in public housing. While much of the funds are set to be allocated over a 2 to 4 year period, in the more immediate future, New York State will receive $100 million in funding to bring broadband to underserved areas. These improvements will improve the lives of millions of Brooklynites who live in public housing. Next question. How soon will we see EV charging stations across the country for road trips? We charge ours at home right now. Well, this will start to happen as soon as funding is made available starting next year. The infrastructure bill includes a total of $5 billion to build out a nationwide network of EV charging stations along our highways and major roads. Next question. What's the plan for EV chargers in Brooklyn? And what about all the Americans who cannot afford an electric vehicle? Well, this is an issue that I've been very vocal on. And when it comes to tackling climate change and ensuring that a clean transportation sector benefits all of our communities, particularly Black and Brown communities who have been most burdened by air pollution from trucks, buses, and cars, electric vehicles are the future. But we must ensure that this future benefits all communities equitably. Unfortunately, the infrastructure bill does little to address this, which is again why it's so important that the Senate now pass the Build Back Better Act. In the Build Back Better Act, it includes critical pieces of my EV charging equity legislation that will provide over $3 billion of funding to support the deployment of publicly accessible EV charging stations in and around underserved communities, including dense urban areas like Brooklyn, where people live and work. On top of that, the Build Back Better Act also provides major new financial incentives to help make both new and used electric vehicles more affordable for the average family so that by 2030, if not sooner, it will be more affordable to drive electric than to drive gas. Next question. Can funding be can funding be allocated to fix Prospect Park's drainage system? There is also a dire need to upgrade our stormwater and waste pipes throughout the district to address chronic flooding. Can funding be provided for this as well? I say a big yes. This infrastructure bill includes hundreds of millions of dollars through a municipal grant program that is specifically intended to address sewer and stormwater overflow issues. This is indeed a major issue in Brooklyn, not only because of our aging sewage system, but also due to climate change. And this funding will go a long way to upgrade our sewer and stormwater infrastructure. Next question. Kings Highway in Brooklyn needs end-to-end repair. Can the BIF help with this? The Belt Parkway also needs work as well. The answer to that is yes. The BIF absolutely will help address this. New York State alone is set to receive over $11 billion for highway repairs and upgrades. And you can be sure that I will be a strong advocate and voice so that we get the funding we so desperately need right here in Brooklyn to repair our highways and also make significant upgrades to make our roads smarter and our streets safer. Next question. What funding is made available for Brooklyn highways and transit systems? Well, like I mentioned, New York State will receive $11 billion for highway repairs and upgrades. In addition to this, New York State will also receive nearly $10 billion for public transit repairs and improvements, including new clean air electric buses. This funding will be critical to modernizing our crumbling subway system, upgrading our buses and bus stops, and creating a more equitable, accessible, resilient, and sustainable transit system throughout all of Brooklyn. Why the Build Back Better agenda is necessary right now is because while the BIF is a transformative piece of legislation, the law now for our country and our communities, it is insufficient in its ability to address so many of the issues the people living in our communities are struggling with. That's why we need the U.S. Senate to follow suit of the House and passed the Build Back Better Act. What the Build Back Better Act does is it really moves us into the 21st century with an economy that deals with everyday issues that Brooklynites, New Yorkers, and all Americans are truly facing. It really looks at things like the care economy. Our care economy forms America's backbone. These tireless workers care for our children, they care for our parents, they care for us. It's about time that someone cared for them. And that's why I'm so excited about the provisions in the Build Back Better Act that provide for quality home care as well as child care and pre-K, universal pre-K. Climate provisions. We are hurtling towards a climate crisis and are running out of time to do something about it. Hurricane Ida is a prime example of the need for meaningfully addressing climate change. Just imagine we weren't uh, expecting the remnants of a hurricane that hit the southeastern portion of the country to be so devastating in the northeast in New York City. Yet we saw a loss of life, a loss of property, and a displacement of New Yorkers. And New Yorkers are still working to recover from it. As these disasters and storms become the new norm, we must prepare our city, state, and our nation and her people for what lies ahead. The solutions are with smart cities and a clean energy economy, which are all only possible through the Build Back Better Act. For the climate provisions of the Build Back Better Act alone, it is paramount that we pass this legislation. And we know that we are still not where we need to be with respect to health care in the United States. Too many Americans are paying too much for health care. The Build Back Better Act will reduce premiums for more than 9 million Americans by extending and expanding the premium tax credit. It will provide 4 million more Americans with desperately needed health insurance. It will expand Medicare to help older Americans access affordable hearing care. In addition to that, we have not forgotten about our immigrant population. New York City is the home to millions of immigrants and their descendants. And so untold immigrants were left behind, will not be left behind with the investments of the Build Back Better Act to secure their right to live and prosper in our country, in their country. New Americans are America's future, and it's time that we treated them that way. The work that remains to deliver the Build Back Better agenda is we need to make sure that a handful of members who held up our vote on the Build Back Better Act have made promises to our caucus, and just as importantly, President Joe Biden and the people of our country, that they will help us to pass the Build Back Better agenda in its entirety upon seeing the finalized financial figures. We expect a vote on the Build Back Better Act and a victory for the American people in the coming days. I want to thank you all so much for joining me this evening and spending this time to hear a bit more about this groundbreaking legislation. It is so critical that you share this information with those around you. There are those here in Washington who would essentially disregard, essentially make false statements about how important this legislation is for their own political agendas. Let me just say that our generation owes it to the generations that are coming after us to make these investments now. And so I encourage you to stay updated on all of my legislative efforts by following me on my social media at Rep. Yvette Clarke on Instagram, on Twitter, and on Facebook, and signing up for my newsletter. So, to everyone this evening, thank you once again for joining me. This uh, town hall is coming to a close, but the video that we've obtained will be available on my website. So please share this information with others. I want everyone to stay safe, stay healthy, stay strong. And if you haven't already, please get vaccinated and get your booster shots. Take good care, everyone. Thank you for joining me.